Roderick, Saskatchewan.
Wow.
And they lived on Battle Creek, about 9 miles southwest of town here. And that's where he grew up. And in the 30s, sometime, I'm not sure of the year, but he went out to Trail, BC to make a living like a lot of the prairie people did.
Oh, did they?
Because it was such a dust bowl down here that a lot of people left.
Mm-hmm.
And he went out there and met my mother, and that's where I was born, is in Trail, BC. And then they come back here when I was a year old, which is in 42. And I've been pretty much in the Consell area ever since. But then he did work for Art Rottenham for, I think it was a year, and then he got to be a pasture manager on National and Piet-Ray Community Pasture.
Mm.
And he worked for them until spring of 49. I think probably he left there in about April, I'm not sure, and started farming on his own then. And he did his own, farming and raising cattle till he passed away. He never did quit.
Once he started?
He did actually quit because he had diabetes and lost a leg, and so he couldn't do anything, but he'd still come out once in a while. Once he lost his leg, we had to transfer him around, but he probably was 84 before he lost his leg, so he probably worked on the place till 84.
Oh my gosh.
Which was quite a long time.
Oh,
he used to tell stories about when he was 11 years old. They'd go riding in the lease down there, and he said you could ride all day and maybe see one deer or one antelope. And he always, so that would be 11 years old. He was born in 11, so that would be about 22 then, 1922. And he said you never seen anything, maybe one deer or one antelope in the day. And he always figured that was because at that time there were no dams and dugouts or anything like that. All there was for water source for the animals was Battle Creek, and the odd other thing. But after farmers got putting in dams and dugouts, then the antelope and the deer started increasing, and because they had water sources here and there. That was his story about that anyway.
Oh my gosh.
And it makes sense, like if they don't have places to go and have a drink, like we were talking about water at the start there, well, they can't exist either, so that's a big difference there, I guess, is on the water and the animals.
He would have seen a big change then in his life.
Oh yeah, that's for sure, from farming with horses to getting the tractors. And one thing he never could stand is a damn tractor with a cab on it. He didn't like that. The glass gets dirty and you can't see. He didn't like that. He didn't mind sitting in a truck or a car, but the tractors were too dirty.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess I could have been here since I was a year old. And I went to school 6 miles south of Consell in a little one-room school called Lammermoor. And that school happens to be sitting just east of the Co-op Bulk in town.
Oh.
It's just an old building there on Schmidt's land.
Mm-hmm.
That was the school I went to for quite a few years. And we moved into town in 1954 from the farm, and then I started going to school in Consell. And I didn't go to school that long. I went partway into grade 9, and I wasn't Me and the principal, or my school teacher who was the principal, we didn't get along that good, so I decided there was a lot better things to do than go to school. I never did like paperwork, I still don't.
Yeah. Let me hide the papers. I should ask before we go on what your father's full name was.
Joseph Edward Kisell,
Joseph Edward.
yeah. And my grandpa, Kisell, I don't know his second name, but he was Joseph Kisell too.
Oh.
So he was Joseph Kisell Sr. and Dad was Joseph Kisell Jr.
Okay.
Which created a lot of mail problems that Dad didn't like.
Yeah.
Because, he'd get Grandpa's mail and Grandpa'd get his, and that created problems too. And my mother's name was Helen Iva Kisell.
Oh, Iva.
Yeah, she was originally a Quants.
Mm-hmm.
And you talking about the Reesers in Ontario, we found out not very many years ago, my sister has a bull arena in North Battleford, and every year they have a bowling conference type thing, and she was going down to Niagara Falls, and we always wanted to go there, so we went with her. And on the way down there, she had communicated with people that they weren't actually related to us anymore, but their parents and stuff were involved, and so we got to see where the Quantses originated in Ontario. And my grandpa Quants come from down in that country, I forget what the town's name was, and then he moved up to Robson, BC.
Oh.
And that's where my mother was raised. And it ended up that, I guess when Dad was working in the smelter and trail, a lot of the people working there didn't have a place in Trail to stay, so they had a bus or car that they took back and forth from Castlegar and Robson to go to Trail and work there. So that's where he met my mother, I guess. My oldest sister was born there too, in Trail, BC, and my youngest sister was born in Maple Creek, so
Oh my
we're
God.
kind of scattered around.
So your sisters were out there, born out there?
My oldest sister
Your
was.
oldest sister.
The youngest one was born in Maple Creek.
Mm-hmm.
She was kind of an afterthought, I guess. I went to work for the LID. Was the first actual away from home job. Well, it wasn't away from home, it was south of town. At one time there was a municipality in the Consell area, and farther south was the LID.
So what is the LID?
Yeah.
Is it a place or?
No, it's, you know what a municipality is?
Yeah.
Like the RM here?
Yeah.
Well, the LID was,
It's like an improvement district.
yeah, an improvement district. They did the same work as the municipality do,
Oh, okay.
only they were a different area.
Ah, okay.
And I can't remember what year, I should because it was on the RM, but when the municipality took over the LID.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was young, I used to do some haying, and I worked for the LID that one time. And then I eventually so I worked for PFRA. I spent 33 and a half years working for the PFRA.
Oh, wow.
Started working for PFRA for a fellow called Johnny Hanson. He was the boss. And I started working in 1959 and stayed with PFRA most of my life.
Wow.
We were on pasture improvements for years. I'd have to look up these dates and stuff, but I worked for pasture improvements in 59 and 60. And in 61, I didn't have a job, so we were married by then. We got married in 1960, and we went up to the South Saskatchewan River, Empress and Leader area, and I worked for a farmer up there for 2 years. And then I come back down here and went to work for PFRA again on construction. They at that time the Moose Jaw PFRA did all the construction, the big construction. They were working on the west end of Cypress Lake because the water was so low. We're gonna put pumps in the lake to get the water out. And the first job I did with them, we'd get a little poly rope and put 3 sticks of dynamite around it and tape it. And then when we got I think we wrapped a ton of dynamite at a time. We were out on the raft in the lake, and then we pushed the raft along and tramped this dynamite into the lake in the mud, and then blow it off, and that's how we made the first trench in West Cypress for the pumps. Wow! So I worked for that construction for a year. We did that trenching with dynamite, and we put in a structure at the west end of the Cypress in the outlet canal. And then on the east Cypress, we ended up later in the summer, we put in the concrete structure that's the inlet structure now. And then right in the late fall, we went down to Val Marie and put in some wooden structures down there on the project.
Who taught you how to use the dynamite?
Well, our boss, Dan Greenlee. Oh no, it wasn't him. It was Leonard Wigwitz was his name. He had a crew of his own, but nobody was experienced with dynamite except for him. So when the blasting was going on, Leonard Wigwitz come down and showed you how to do this, like he had his papers and everything. And I'd like to work for him. He was a super good guy, full of fun and stuff. I stayed with the guy I started with. So that was 1963, I guess it was. And then in wintertime, I guess I was on unemployment for a while, and then this Johnny Hanson that I used to work for in Pasture Improvements, he come up one time. We lived in a little house in town and wondered if I wanted to go piling bush. Knocking bush down and piling it, so I ended up doing that.
Where was that?
West of Saskatoon at Asquith. I know so many pastures, I'm not sure of that one, I'd have to look it up too. But it was north and east of Asquith. So I piled brush that winter, and I worked for Johnny Hanson again that summer. Trying to figure the years out here. And the next winter come along, and he wanted to know if I'd go down into Manitoba and do the same work. And I really didn't want to leave my family that far behind, so my cousin went down in my place. So yeah, that was it. And then the next year, the next summer, I worked for Johnny Hanson again till late in the fall, and then I actually quit and come home. When you work for Pasture Improvements, you work all over Saskatchewan in whatever pasture needed work done. And the cousin that had piled brush the second winter, he got married and he went up to Thompson, Manitoba, and him and another fella. And so I had no work and was looking for something different, so me and another fellow called Ken McQuaig drove up to Thompson, Manitoba, and we had to take a medical in the paw, and if you passed that, then you could go to Thompson and you'd get a job.
Oh, wow.
So I went up there and worked a very short spell in the, well, backtracking again. When we were down in the pasture by Weyburn when I was working for Johnny before I quit, and Esterhazy potash mines were going. K1 was in production and K2 was being worked on to get ready. And it was one rainy day, so me and another young fellow went to Esterhazy and checked with them on getting a job there. And we could do that, but we had to have a medical for that too. And didn't bother doing that right away. And then I quit working for Johnny, and then, like I said, that fall me and this Kenny McQuaig went to Thompson, Manitoba, and got a job up there in the hard rock mine. And I went underground because I always wanted to do that. And the level I worked on at that time was the 2,200 feet down. And they had 2,400 was being like it's hard rock, and they take the ore out and make tunnels to drive through, like for the train to go and stuff. And they were just making the tunnels down there. They weren't taking ore out, so I worked on the 2,200 level. But I only spent about 2 weeks there, and it got cold, and I was a long ways from home, so I got thinking about Esterhazy, and I thought that would be a better deal, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I come back to Esterhazy, and I got my medical. I only worked at Thompson for about 2 weeks, and come back to Esterhazy and got my medical, and they said they'd call me when they had a place for me. I worked with the pipe fitters when I got there. And I come home in about the middle of December from Thompson, and about the first week or the second week of January, Esterhazy called and said I could go to work, so I went there. And I worked there for, I believe it was 6 weeks with pipe fitters. It was, I liked working there too, because it was, well, when you first start, you just do whatever they need to. You're just a flunky for whatever. But they needed somebody to cut the pipes on a 45 bevel on the ends for the welder to weld back together again. So I learned how to do that, and the guy that was doing it quit. So then all I did was stand all there all day cutting the end of the pipe. And then I learned how to weld there on my spare time. Had nothing to do. There was a fellow there. I had a real good boss. And he said, well, just if you want to weld, go ahead. So I was doing that too. One thing they told me when I first started there, it wasn't very long, you know. And he told me to go up on the floor up above and get, I'm not sure what it was now, but I went up the stairs and got out on this platform and looked around, and I couldn't find what it was I was supposed to pick up. Went back down, and oh yeah, he said it's out there. You go back up and off from the platform, you walk that beam out there, and you get it. It was hanging up there. I said, I don't think I'm going to do that. The beam was probably 6 inches wide and about 100 feet off the floor down below. He said, well, if you're scared, you'll probably fall. So he said, he come up with me and walked out, picked it up. And he said, when you're walking a beam like that, you don't watch your feet. You watch about 10 feet in front of you. He said, you watch too close, you're going to fall off for sure. So by the time I had my 6 weeks in, I could go walk those beams. It didn't bother me. But I wouldn't want to do it again now. Actually, I got laid off at the potash mine on a Friday. And Gilbert Hill, who looked after the irrigation project here, I had asked him for a job previously to that. And I got home on a Friday night. He come Monday and asked if I'd go to work for him.
Oh, wow.
So I got a job at home.
That's worked out.
It was kind of hard to take the paycheck because it was only half of what I was getting at the mine. At least you were home with your family anyway.
Yeah.
So I started working for the irrigation in 1967. And I stayed with that till 1998.
March the 30th, I believe.
All water in Canada that runs through to the U.S., 50% has to go to the Americans.
I've just been learning about this.
And Merv, he was the fella in Haber that looked after the irrigation projects in Montana. And him and I kept in communication, so he knew what was coming and when, and it made it a lot easier for both of us. The first year I actually started running the project as a manager. I was maybe I shouldn't be talking about this stuff. I was getting some static from the Canadians, the water survey, that they wanted more water to go to the States because we owed them. And I said, well, I can make better use of it by irrigating up here and
Yeah.
let little go and then afterwards pay it back.
Yeah.
And the fella with water survey in Helena, Montana, was a friend of mine at that time, and I told him about the problem I was having, and he said, well, we can't control any more than 25 cubic feet per second. It just don't, that's all we can put down our inlet to our dam. And he said the rest gets wasted because it just goes down into the rivers. And so I finally got him to talk to the people in Regina, and I finally got my way. It took a while. Well, I worked for Gilbert Hill till
98.
no, he retired in December of '79, and then I took over as project manager after that, which was quite a different job too. I liked what I was doing. I always did like running equipment and stuff, and as far as going to the office and sitting there doing paperwork, which I quit school so I didn't have to do. There was a lot of paperwork involved, and so I didn't really care for that. I could sit there at the desk all day and work all day and put it in an envelope and take it to town, and it was gone.
Yeah.
If I was out moving dirt, I could see what I did all day.
Yeah.
Used to snowplow. You ever hear of Davis Canal?
Mm.
You know, when you're going to Maple Creek and you go up
It's Davis Creek Road.
Davis Creek Road, yeah. Well, Davis Creek is, probably 4 miles east of where the sign is.
Okay.
And there's a canal up there that's approximately 7.5 miles long. It takes the water from Davis Creek over here, and it comes around out on the prairie, and then back just on the east side of Belongi Creek, and then it runs back into Belongi Creek and comes back down again into the White Mud, Frenchman Valley. And when you're going to Maple Creek, you go up, over canal going up the hill. That's the inlet to Cypress Lake there.
Yeah.
So we divert the water from Davis Creek to Belongi Creek, and it goes by Sucker Creek and then into Cypress Lake.
So water from Cypress Lake comes from 2 directions?
Yep.
Oh.
Ah.
It comes from the east and the west. Where the water comes from, you know, like the Frenchman area that runs off and the Battle Creek, East Cypress Lake here. This is the RM of Reno 51.
Yeah.
It's that's where the boundary is, and this Davis Canal that we have is actually up in the Maple Creek RM and comes over kind of in a U shape like that, and then it runs back into this Belongi Creek here. So that's how we get these 3 can run into East Cypress, and then on the West Cypress is Battle Creek that comes down and runs in this area. So it's got lots of runoff area, but all of this water, Battle Creek half of the water has to go to the Americans, and up here the Belongi Creek and Davis Creek normally would run down the Frenchman this way. So East End Irrigation Project and Valmarie Irrigation Project have to have their water, and then if we can tell before it happens that there's going to be too much, then we can run it into Cypress Lake. But if there's enough in Cypress Lake, if it was full enough, it runs out here, out an outlet, and you can send it down the creek to Val Marie and East End. So that's quite a lot of messing around. But this canal up here all has to be snow plowed in the spring because that's little Siberia up there. It just storms and blows and snows, and the canal fills in one of the first things that happen. Yeah, we used to start work there in about the 1st of March on the average. With when I first started working up there, you had a cat and a bulldozer, or maybe 2 bulldozers, and then you had another cat with a snowblower on it.
Yeah.
And we would blow that canal out and snow plow it out like that way. And then when you were finished, you had a trench 8 feet wide, and however deep, you know, it could be up to 10 feet deep. And then the sun would shine in there on these square walls, and put a glaze on there, and it would freeze it, you know. And so water could run through that canal for at least a week before it would ever start to cut that glaze off the walls and start washing the snow. And so Gilbert decided, and we shared the snow blower with me, they had canals too. Gilbert decided that it would be better if we took just cats and bulldozers and dozed the snow out of the ditch. And so then you'd have maybe not as deep, but you'd have a lot more width. And that did work better because you had a bigger surface running, but the cats would pack the snow fairly hard too. But if the water run through for a few days, it would crack and break and start coming up and dissolving. Just before I retired, BFRA had a big, like a high hole, only it was run by cable, and they could reach out in the canal and clean that out and set it on the back side of the bank, so it wasn't bothering. And that worked really good, and they're still doing it yet. It's not the same thing as a big high hole there. And you can reach in there, take the snow out, and make a trench about the same as we did with the bulldozers, but you can go right to the bottom. And there's no packing of the snow, so it just, the water starts dissolving it and moving it out right away. The cats worked okay, but they packed it so hard that it was kind of like a block of ice.
Yeah.
And they just wouldn't move out. So that's the big problem with that. It's quite costly and time consuming. One year we snow plowed up there for 6 weeks. We'd get a piece done, well, we eventually got it all done. But you just kind of get done and then it would storm and blow it back in again. And you had to keep snow trapped, keep the snow out. Quite a procedure. I started out when I come on Davis Creek Canal. And my boss at that time was Gilbert Hill, and he said that originally, before he started snow blowing the canal and doing it that way, he used to get a bunch of people who weren't that busy from down here, a bunch of men, and they'd go up there with spades and scoop shovels, and the water would start down the canal, and they'd lead it down and make a hole and let it run down through into the canal, and it would go underneath for a while, and then it would come back up, and then they'd lead it down. He said that's how they got the water down the canal for quite a few years. Do it that way, but then he said at that time the water would start running in the hills before it started down this way, and that would work. But it got so it seemed like it was warming up, and you had to get the water things out quicker to be able to get the water. Because if you didn't, then you'd miss it, and it would all go down east. Where sometimes, quite often, they didn't need it then.
Had to be really knowledgeable to know how to move it.
Well, yeah, I don't know. A lot of our people in the higher office didn't seem to believe these stories that you wanted to tell them. They had their ideas and they thought they should be good. There's nothing wrong with them. And like a lot of that stuff works nice on paper, but it don't work in real life. The flood of '52 is a thing that people down here will probably never forget. I thought it was great. I didn't have to go to school for quite a while.
Yay!
We were on the wrong
Flood
side of
day.
the creek and you couldn't get over.
Oh.
Yeah, the flood of '52 was a big flood. And then when I started working for PF in '67, if I remember right, Gilbert said we put 3 inches of water in Cypress Lake in 3 weeks, and that was pretty well the spring runoff. And then we got a big snowstorm in May. We got 18 inches of wet snow, and it killed calves and
Oh, no.
made all sorts of problems. But we put 3 feet of water in right short order after that. Made a big difference.
So how did your parents handle the flood then?
The water come up just about into the corral, but not quite. Yeah, no problems other than you couldn't go anywhere because everything was flooding so that. I think that was the year we took the team in the wagon. We had a rubber tire wagon, and we went north and across prairie and stuff, and through a coulee they call Bull Coulee. And we drove up to the edge, and then Dad got out with a logging chain and he wrapped it around the wagon box and underneath the wagon frame. And I wondered why he was doing that. Well, he said when we go across this coulee, he said the wagons, the box will float off the wagon unless I tie it on because the water was so high. And we did that. We tied it down. We got into town and got our groceries. And we made it back home again.
Your father lived here?
No. There was never a house here, Joanne and I was looking for a shop, a building to make a shop out of. And Larry Sodden had bought a house moving outfit from a fellow in Maple Creek. And the fellow in Maple Creek had picked this house up. This comes from Willow Creek Customs, Canada Customs down there. This was the Canada Customs house. Yeah, and him and the fellow that he was moving it for got into some problem because it was costing more to move than the guy expected. So he finally left it in a big coulee way down there in the lease on blocks, timbers and blocks. And when Larry Sodden bought the moving outfit, he wanted the blocks and the timbers and stuff. And I found out that he had it, and he found out I was looking for a building, and so we made a deal, and he hauled it up here, and she seen it. She said, "I want that for a house." She said, "That's unique. I want it for a house." So I lost my shop. This is where Council is, and you come down the road, and over here and down, and this is where
Joe Kisell.
Dad lived for. That's where his parents built 3 houses actually, and that's where we lived, just right on the edge of the creek, right about where that dot is there. We lived there till '54, and then we moved into a house in town. But this house here is what Joanne and I put in here in 1980, I guess it was, or 81. That originally was the Rottenham place, and Dad lived here, and Rottenham's lived right there. And I think Dad worked for Rottenham for a year until he got the pasture job. And this area down in here is the PF pasture that he worked on. There's the Battle Creek pasture, Nashland pasture, and the Govenlock pasture. Dad had this land here, and this piece down here, and then he had another piece of land up here.
So the reason this is all gray is because it's community, the shared
All PFRA pasture, yeah.
PFRA.
Federal government pasture, and then it was built kind of in the 30s too, in the early years, because like the old people always said, that this area, there was a homestead on every quarter.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the 30s come along and dried them out and they had to leave, things weren't good. And so the government took over this land and made pastures out of it, so you could put cattle in there and have a place for your cattle, because most people at that time just had a little bit of land, so they didn't have enough to raise enough cattle to live in. That was a tea-eating house that they built down there. And it come in a package, and actually my grandma bought and paid for that.
Oh,
And it was on the cut bank there, and it had a veranda in the front on the bottom floor and one up on the top floor and right over the creek, and you could, a good place to sleep in the summertime. You could hear the water running over the rocks.
nice and cool.
Yeah, it was really
The
nice.
water.
When it was running, it was, I think, I can only remember one time when we were living there that the creek went dry and didn't run in the summertime. And they said that was hardly, pretty well unheard of. But it's getting to be more heard of ever, you know, dries up more often now than it ever did. But we used to have a lot of snow in the winter time. Last winter was a sample of the 50s.
Hmm.
We used to get a lot of snow like that most of the time.